Hey, welcome back to the conversation. And still talking about political issues around the African continent. We have 89-year-old Paul Biya, that's Cameroon president, set to celebrate 40 years anniversary as president of Cameroon. And we also have in Equatorial Guinea.
Yes, they say Africa is a continent for old leaders. You have in Equatorial Guinea Teodoro Obiang, who's been president since 1979, if I'm not mistaken. He's running for his sixth term in office next week. So it's quite interesting that we have long-term leaders. Of course, not forgetting Denis Sassou Nguesso in Congo, Brazzaville, and also in that region you have Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. So there must be something about the presidency that makes them, want to stay in office in perpetuity. But it's a conversation we'll have some other time.
We'll definitely have that. But right now, today on the program, we'll be discussing the conviction of a notorious former Liberian rebel commander, Kunti Kamara, by a French court for his role in the West African country civil war. Now, Kamara's life imprisonment gives hope to victims who have been seeking justice after the 12-year civil war, which left thousands killed and nearly 1 million displaced.
Also, we'll switch gears to Ethiopia, where after 2 years of hostilities, the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan forces have finally signed a peace deal. This big question is, will both sides honor this deal?
Definitely questions that we had, because we had a truce in March, and unfortunately the truce were brokered in August due to both sides not facing their own sides of the truce. But right now we're having, and this time around they said complete cessation of hostilities. So we wonder.
So what makes it interesting this time around is there's a mechanism to monitor the progress, and there also so you get constant feedback to the African Union, and it was done at a higher level, diplomatic level, involving the South Africans, the African Union, and other mediators. So we hope, for the sake of peace and the long-suffering people in Tigray and different parts of Ethiopia, that this does come to a fruitful conclusion and an end.
And that's the emphasis there on hope. But right now, let's begin in West Africa, where a former Liberian rebel commander, Kunti Kamara, has been sentenced to life in jail by a Paris court over violence against civilians and complicity in crimes against humanity during Liberia's civil wars. It is France's first trial of a participant in Liberia's bloody civil wars. The court found Kamara guilty of crimes against civilians between 1993 and 1994, including a teacher whose heart he reportedly ate, and not preventing soldiers under his command from repeatedly raping 2 teenage girls. The former rebels' defense team had, however, questioned the trustworthiness of the evidence against him.
Now, 47-year-old Kamara was a regional commander of the United Liberation Movement for Liberia for Democracy, a rebel group that fought the National Patriotic Front of former President Charles Taylor. The Liberian civil wars, dating between 1989 and 2003, was marked by mass murders, rape and mutilations, and in many cases by child soldiers conscripted by warlords, with atrocities against civilians, which left about 250,000 people dead. Now, joining us to discuss all of this and more is David Anyaele. He is the Executive Director, Center for Citizens with Disabilities and Survivor, Sierra Leone-Liberia War. We also have, joining us later, Cholo Brooks, a publisher, GNN-LIBERIA newspaper, who joins us from the Liberian capital, Monrovia. We also have Benny Bravo Johnson, a journalist, joining from Monrovia, Liberia. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you so much.
Now, I'd like to start with you, David. You're a victim of this very terrible war. What was your reaction to the news of Liberian rebel leader Kunti Kamara sentenced to life in prison in the Paris court?
Yeah, I must commend the French court for a job well done by life sentencing against Kamara. This is bringing a closure for those who are the survivors, victims of his atrocities, recognizing that this guy was not just notorious, but wicked and callous. The only way to say this must not happen again is by ensuring that individuals who are tracked as perpetrators of heinous crime against humanity are brought to justice. I think justice has been served, and I must commend the French court once again for making this possible.
Okay, now, still talking about Kamara, I mean, how do the people in Liberia remember him? You gave very strong words describing him. And what exactly were the charges brought against Kamara?
Come again?
I said, how do the people in Liberia remember Kamara, and what exactly were the charges brought against him?
Well, for those who were within the period where he was in Liberia, where he was in reign of terror, I think they could recall the pain, the agony associated with his activities as a rebel leader. Recognizing that thousands of individuals died in the process, appreciating that women and girls were raped, violence of different color, shape were perpetrated against individuals, vulnerable groups, in particular, the female gender. I think this sentencing will, bring a kind of, a soothing balm to the families and those who suffered atrocities during the reign of this wicked individual.
Now, David, lots of our viewers will be wondering that why is the trial of this notorious rebel leader taking place at more than 6,000 kilometers from Monrovia, where most of these crimes were committed, on another continent? Why was the trial held in Paris, and what were the circumstances that led to the arrest of Mr. Kunti Kamara?
Yeah, the French government has a duty under international law to ensure that justice is served for victims of indigenous crime, be it war crime or crime against humanity, as the case of Kamara. Recognizing that Africa and its leaders are weak in terms of bringing this kind of justice to their people, I think the role the French authorities has played is a demonstration that they have the capacity and capability to ensure that the kind of weakness in our governance and judicial system are not allowed to transfer to their place. Those who participated in crimes, indigenous crime and crimes against humanity, do not use Europe or its environment as a hiding ground after they've done such evil. So I can say that the French authorities have done well in bringing justice to survivors.
But how was he arrested? Was he arrested in France, and was he hiding?
Indication, it shows that he was in France. There are agencies, international organizations that spotted him and took time to investigate him, thereafter reporting to the authorities. So he was having good time in a foreign land whose systems are clear, whose systems are for justice and equity, forgetting that he participated in destroying the system in Africa. I think that was how he was held in Europe.
Okay, thank you so much, David. And we also have joining us for this conversation, we have Cholo Brooks, as publisher, GNN-LIBERIA newspaper. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Monrovia, Liberia. And just to start with it, I mean, this conviction of Kunti Kamara, what does it mean for the people in Liberia?
Well, following the pronouncement over the weekend, a lot of people who I've spoken to are rejoicing because they said they were victims of Kamara's partake in the war. So they were happy, especially those from Lopa, where the ULIMO was based, talked to me and said that they were so happy that Kamara had been convicted of this heinous crime.
Now, stay with you, Cholo Brooks. What impact will this verdict have on Liberia, where very few war criminals have been charged or ever brought to justice?
Well, people are still craving that, yes, indeed, the war crime need to do more because we have a lot of people who commit heinous crimes are still roaming around here holding political positions. So people are saying the move by France is good and hope that it will be extended to others who are still here and roaming the streets of Monrovia with impunity.
All right, now, David, if we go look back, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up in 2006 to probe crimes committed during the war. But the recommendations published in 2009 have remained largely unimplemented. Now, what's the stance of Gbenga administration on this?
Well, from the beginning, the president, Mr. Weah, said he was going to give the support to the TRC. But to the surprise of everyone, Mr. Weah continue to remain quiet. People are advocating for the establishment of the war crime code, the war crime for those who committed heinous crimes to be prosecuted. But Mr. Weah has not said anything officially as president of Liberia to giving his blessing to the establishment of the prosecution of those who committed these crimes against human beings. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to bring in David. Now, David, there's a thirst for justice in Liberia, like you mentioned earlier during your submission. Many warlords who were incriminated are still considered heroes in their communities. Joe Cholo Brooks just confirmed that many of them are driving around Monrovia with impunity, like nothing happened. There are also those who say, you know what, let's move on. This is in the past. It happened 30 years ago, and allow for reconciliation and peace to reign. David, which school of thought do you belong to, and why do you take your position?
Except if you have not suffered atrocity, except if you have not undergone the traumatic experience of being exposed to the callous and unimaginable wickedness perpetrated by these criminal elements that participated in rebel activities in any of these countries. That is the only way you can civilize it. Yes, many may say, let bygone be bygone. But people like David Anyaele, who saw it full time, who happens to be a victim of some of these atrocities, I belong to the school that says that justice must be done. You recall in 2004, between 2003 and 2007, I was instrumental in ensuring that Cholo was arrested in Nigeria, and that it ensures that he did not benefit from asylum as a asylum seeker in Nigeria. And we succeeded in chasing him out of Nigeria to the extent that he was served, the kind of justice that all of us desire. I belong to the school that says that the only way to say this must not happen again is by bringing perpetrators to justice. And that is where I belong to.
Now, stay with you, David, and still on the subject of justice. Why wasn't this a momentum? Because, Charles Taylor was not only a disruptive individual in Liberia, but also across the border in Sierra Leone. So why do you think there was no pressure from the international community after Charles Taylor was arrested and sentenced in The Hague to go after some of his henchmen? Because, he's just one of so many of this notorious warlords with names like General Mosquito, General Butt Naked, and all of that committed all sorts of heinous crimes, eating hearts. And you also mentioned your own personal story. What went wrong? Did your organization not sustain pressure, or you weren't getting cooperation from Salif Johnson's government and President Weah?
It's all about state interest. It's all about state's position in vis-a-vis bringing justice and promoting the socio-economic well-being of their people. Don't forget also that in seeking for justice, it costs money. So where countries or like Liberia or Sierra Leone, if they don't have the requisite resources required to prosecute or to engage, they may be weak in terms of bringing enough evidences to track perpetrators, and bring them to justice. Maybe because of economic reasons, maybe because of other strategic international political reasons, they feel they may not pursue. But people like us believe that it is only when justice is served, it is only when perpetrators of indigenous crime or crime against humanity are brought to justice that justice, peace, and prosperity will take its root. Because whatever thing you do, where there is no justice, where there is no assurance of mutual safety and security, sometimes the kind of economic prosperity we are seeking for may not come. So I think it is all on the state and their interest.
Okay, now still looking at justice. Now, Joel, over time prior to this judgment, Kamara has always pleaded not guilty, and the lawyers have 10 days to appeal the verdict. Do you think they will be appealing the verdict given the evidences and testimonies against him in trial?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, there won't be anything here done except justice is prevailed. Like David said, people are concerned. People are calling for more justice. People are calling for the international court to come in and rescue the people of Liberia. People are still calling for the prosecution of those warlords who are now roaming the street of Monrovia and bragging of their achievement in political gain. So people are still calling. So I think with this prosecution that is taking place in France and bringing to justice Mr. Kamara, Liberians who I talked to, my reporter and I talked to today, they are so excited of this. I mean, they say, yes, indeed. We hope Mr. Prince Johnson will also face the same wrath. We hope the other guys who took part in the war, even though Mr. Taylor is in the UK, but Prince Johnson is here, and then he's roaming the street, he's breaking around here. He's the #1 guy in his home county, Niba County. So people are still calling for justice. People are still calling for justice. Yeah.
Now, stay with you, Joe, and still on the subject of justice. We know it's been 30 years. It's almost a generation, and Liberians will go to the polls in a few years' time. Is this matter a sensitive topic for elections, or it's not part of the front burner? And I also want to know if the younger generation that were born after the Civil War, that would be about 30 years old now, do they have any sense of what happened during the Liberian Civil War? And is the government doing anything to preserve the memories of those that lost their lives in this terrible war?
Well, to that, with the last issue you just talked about, nothing has been done by the government to making sure that to memorialize those who died during the war. I was in conversation with one of the human rights guys, and he blamed the government of being mute in taking action against those who took part in the war. And then another thing that is being said all around here is that people want to see justice prevail. People want to see justice prevail. As you know, like you said, we have the younger generation who never saw the war, but still they sit at the entertainment center and talk about prosecution of those who committed heinous crimes. I mean, the younger generation, you won't believe it, they sit and talk about it. In fact, the focus point is that they are so concerned, the younger generation are so concerned. Why is it that Prince Johnson, who actually played a major role during the Civil War that carried more than 250,000 people, is still here? Why can't he be prosecuted? So I mean, these are the talk of the town here. People are so concerned that yes, indeed, with the indictment and the guilty verdict brought down on Kamara, people are saying we hope Prince Johnson also will be brought down one day.
So does Prince Yomi Johnson have any immunity? And what's his relationship with President Weah? Why does he seem to be an untouchable? I mean, there's widespread evidence that this man was a major actor in the Liberian Civil War. So why does it seem to be an untouchable?
But the thing here is that I'll tell you something, my brother. Prince Johnson is a smart guy. Mr. Weah came to power. Prince Johnson got so close to Mr. Weah, and then he used his kinsmen during the war, during the election to vote for Mr. Weah. So I think Mr. Weah is also looking at Prince Johnson as one of his kinsmen, as one of his heroes. He's not saying anything because the first thing here is that people are looking up to the president. The TRC came and said those who took part in the war must be brought to justice. And even some lawmakers in the House, where Prince Johnson is, are also calling for the establishment of war crime court here in Liberia and the prosecution of those who commit a heinous crime, including Prince Johnson. And they said that. People thought Mr. President will have also come out to give them the blessing for the war crime court to come to Liberia and grab those who were involved and kill a lot of innocent people.
Okay, now, David, they say after a war is another war, which is the impact of the war. I want to look at the victims this time around while we're looking for proper justice of all those that perpetrated this heinous act. Now, what about the victims? Was there any compensation? How has life been prior or after, rather, the Liberian Civil War?
Well, it has not been easy, recognizing that the economy of the country is not all that flamboyant in order to do the kind of economic justice survivors may expect. However, for the fact that we are getting justice in countries as far as France is bringing relief to survivors. It's also sharing hope that the future is bright and giving them a sense of belonging and opportunity for them to give all for the growth and development of their country. So in terms of getting a kind of compensation for survivors, it is a civil war. It may not be easy, especially when the economy is not all that flamboyant. But I'm hopeful. I believe, as the case is going, more justice will be recorded. Many will be called to give account, thereby bringing closure to many families and survivors.
Thank you very much, David. I'd like us to bring in Bravo Johnson. He's Benny Bravo Johnson is a journalist. He also joins us from Monrovia in Liberia. Very warm welcome to you, Benny. Hello, Benny. Can you hear us?
Thank you for your participation on this unique platform today.
Thank you very much, Benny. We're happy to have you. Now, the conversation has been about the conviction of the notorious former Liberian rebel leader, Kunti Kamara, by a French court. What's your take on this? And what are the reactions on the ground in Monrovia, Lofa, and different parts of Liberia? How do the people feel about this verdict?
The sentence being placed on Kunti Kamara is a sign of alleviation that shows that there is a light for justice somewhere taking close to Liberia, because of quite recent, since the end of the Civil War, Liberians have been calling for justice to be handed down on those who perpetrated violence against women and children, those who rape and all kinds of things that brought this nation to its knees. The news of quite recent has been very much encouraging. Liberians are all over yearning for more to come, because as we stand, our justice system, the TRC has recognized over the time for these perpetrators to be brought to justice, but yet and still, government use these people to get political dividends. The government over the past, the Ellen regime and that of the President Weah regime, President Weah came to power on the basis of implementing the TRC report, but yet and still we see AIs. He only used that to get political dividends, and then the people perpetrated violence against Liberian who brought us to our knees. They are still in government, and yet the TRC report is yet to be implemented. And one thing that is certain is we think there will be time that these people will be just like Kunti Kamara has been brought to justice today.
Okay, thank you so much, Benny. Now, I would like to go back to Joel. Now, Joel, it's quite surprising. We told earlier on that the Paris court is the one that is giving this sentence. Now, in other parts of, or in different countries in Africa, we see an uprise of this anti-French sentiments in Burkina Faso and Mali. So what exactly is the relationship between Liberia and France at this point in time? Joel, can you hear me?
Okay, I think we have some connection problems with Joel.
Okay, Benny, if you can hear me. Benny, can you hear me?
Come again with the interrogation, please.
Okay, we're looking at the relationship between France and Liberia. Now, this sentence was given by a Paris court. What can we say about the relationship between France and Liberia?
The bilateral relationship between France and Liberia is out of cool pace because it is not really strong as compared to that of America, because our allies in America, the French government or the French court is acting on what on a treaty that was signed or that was signed on its courts to bring the justice international of perpetrators across the globe. So it has no country bring across to bring the justice those who perpetrate the crime. Our relationship between the French or France is not to America or other countries that we expect to come in, but yet and still we still appreciate. We look forward to them bringing out all of these kind of justices that will help Leone-Liberia from the hands of the perpetrators.
Thank you very much. Benny, I'd like to bring in Joel Brooks. Still talking about the involvement of foreign actors in bringing some of these Liberian warlords to justice. We did see that Kunti Kamara was arrested and sentenced in France. The other few warlords, very few that have been arrested, Charles Taylor, happened outside the shores of Liberia. One of the warlords was arrested in Germany, was sentenced. Another, Charles Taylor, was arrested in Nigeria. So what is happening with the international NGOs, Human Rights Watch and Liberian civil society? I do know earlier you talked about the government will and how it's in cahoots with some of those warlords for political gains. But how much can the international community do to apply pressure on Liberia to, bring about justice? Because millions of the victims are still leaving, and we have one of them that is also in this panel of discussion with us today.
Well, like you said, I mean, Liberians, the problem with Liberians is that we are so forgiving. Anybody committed crime, we are so forgiving. Despite the involvement of human rights organizations calling for the prosecution of warlords, still Liberians continue to say, let bygone be bygone, and not realizing that what the guy did during the war, taking away thousands of lives, is not good for Liberians here in general. But people are still saying, human rights people are still advocating for the establishment of war crime court here, and then the prosecution of the remaining guys who are roaming the street of Monrovia. And then also people are saying there's need that the international community get involved. Probably if the international community get involved, those who are on the ground will get concerned, because the issue, I continue to make reference of Prince Johnson, because Prince Johnson is one of the leading warlords in our country. And Prince Johnson, even when he was sanctioned, I mean, he relinquished his position at the Senate because he was chairing the ECOWAS something at the Senate. He relinquished that full post. And then people are still saying the international community need to do more in the sense that try to hunt for those guys who are on the ground, who are committed heinous crimes, to bring them to justice. But Liberians themselves, they only talk, and nothing else they can do. Looking forward to the international community to come to rescue them.
Okay, now, David, earlier on you talked about, we looked at issues of the 2023 elections and President Ware coming back with this conviction of Kunti Kamara. Now, how much of opposition is there in Liberia to unseat President George Ware at this point in time?
Please come again. The line is not really clear.
Okay, I said earlier on we looked at this conviction being applause for George Ware as he comes back, or he plans to come back in 2023. So looking at the political atmosphere, how much of opposition does Ware have at this point?
Well, the situation remains that the opposition need to work harder. They need to, to push harder to ensure that the key issues that need to drive the campaign are, on the top of the conversation. Recognizing that there are a lot of, political interest vis-a-vis the situation of Liberia, in their quest to get closure for all atrocities that were committed during the Civil War. I think it is a high time that the opposition take advantage of some of these accountability mechanism coming from countries like France to demand that conversation around this election is all inclusive, and that the likes of the president, his effort to come back, geared towards ensuring that victims and survivors get the kind of justice that they deserve.
Thank you very much, David. Let Benny Bravo have the final say here. Benny, in his earlier submission, Joel Brooks did talk about the forgiving nature of the average Liberian. Now, elections are next year. How much of a factor is justice for the victims of the civil war a factor in electing the leaders? You did mention that, President Ware, during his campaign, said that the TRC recommendations were going to be implemented, but we've seen nothing of such in his presidency, and is even closer to some of those that perpetrated some of those heinous crimes in the person of Prince Yomi Johnson. So do you see the conversation changing as Liberians inch towards the general elections next year, or is going to be more of the same, let's bygone be bygone?
Yeah, what I see coming from the angle of many Liberians is that the conversation is gradually changing, because from the onset during his previous campaign, one of his bases was to come and implement the TRC report. And then, quite unfortunately, the first 6 years is about to elapse, and he's yearning for another 6 years. And it appears that President he wants what I previously termed as the political dividends, because Prince Johnson of Nima County, he is a major perpetrator who perpetrated a lot of violence against people in Liberia, but then in control of Voterich County. So President Weah is alarming with this man. From the opposition end, we are anticipating that the opposition may come out with a strong statement in regards to this Kunti Kamara issue and that of the implementations of the TRC report, because most of them, they are trying to use it as the campaign. But quite unfortunately, one of the major opposition leaders in Liberia, from the Alternative National Congress, the Alexander Bobby Cummings, of what reason, he just brought on his campaign team one of those who perpetrated violence against Liberian, the defense minister during the civil unrest, Daniel Chie. Daniel Chie is one of those that used his position at the time to perpetrate violence against many Liberians in the southeast and other parts of Liberia. But yet and still, of recent, a major political PQ opposition leader has brought on board to his campaign team, Daniel Chie. So, in our mind, Liberians are yearning. Why are we like this? Are we forgiving people so early, or is it our weakness? Is it our weakness to just see things and allow it be? And I think that with an answer to that is, we Liberians, we are just weak, and we just people who just see things when it's happy, we consider it to be something that comes from out of divinity and is meant to happen, so we can just move forward. But that is killing us, it's killing our democracy, and it's not helping us. Politicians are using the space of time to do whatsoever they can do, and that particular factor is serving as a motivation to others to perpetrate more violence against women and children in Liberia.
All right, thank you so much for joining us on the conversation, Benny Bravo Johnson. A whole lot, especially as Liberia inches towards elections next year. Thank you also, David Anyaele, Executive Director, Center for Citizens with Disabilities and Survivor, Sierra Leone-Liberia War. Also, a very big thank you to Cholo Brooks, publisher, GNN-LIBERIA newspaper, for joining us on the conversation. Thank you. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, it's finally supposedly good news, as finally there's a truce for the Ethiopia-Tigray conflict. We'll have details of this and how far this peace deal will go after the break.